All right. Ava Community Energy,
Here.
Central Coast Community Energy,
Here.
Clean Power San Francisco,
Here.
MCE Community Energy, I'm sorry, PCE.
Here.
Joining us from MCE's offices. Redwood Coast Community Energy,
Here.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Here.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Here.
Sonoma Clean Power Authority,
Here.
and Valley Clean Energy.
Here.
All present, none absent, sir.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. Alex, any matters subsequent to posting the agenda?
No.
So then we'll go to public comment. This is the opportunity for any members of the public that might be joining in person or online to provide comment or address the board on items not on the agenda. Do we have any public comment?
There have been no requests.
Hearing none, not seeing any hands. Let's move now to item number 5, which is the closed session. Council Nelson, do you want to provide the statement? I don't know if you need to provide a statement before we move into public comment on the item in closed session.
No, the board will now move into closed session for the item listed on the agenda. Chair, we should confirm there isn't public comment.
Stephanie, is there any public comment on item 5?
There have been no public requests.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
There have been no requests to speak on
Okay.
item 5.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now move into closed session. You should all have a separate link for that item. Councilor Alex, will this stay open if people want to stay here and okay, so you can stay here and we'll be back into this item or into the public meeting after the closed session item.
Yes, that's correct.
All public locations have remained.
Oh, great. So we have our public locations. We confirmed we have a quorum. Let's hear from council. Do we have any reportable actions from closed session?
No reportable actions, Chair. Thank you.
Great. So let's move on to the consent agenda. From directors, any questions or comments on any consent agenda items? Is there a motion to approve?
Sonoma moves approval.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jeff. Second by Monica. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda before we call vote?
There have been no requests to speak.
Great. We'll take a roll call vote then.
Ava Community Energy,
Yes.
Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco,
Yes.
PCE Community Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power Authority.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Let's move to the regular agenda. Our first item at 7A is to consider and potentially approve amendment number 1 to the Fish Lake Renewable Power Purchase Agreement. General Manager Morris.
Thank you, directors. In the board packet, we provide a memo and some of the reasoning for this amendment, which changes some of the terms and conditions of the contract and would get this contract in good standing and moving forward to be online next summer. We think this geothermal project is widely supported by the members and of interest to them, and we would expect the approval here to be for CC Power. And then members would have their own downstream approval process that based on their boards and their processes. Chair Shaw, I don't know if we need too much further discussion given the memo and the redacted contract that's been provided, but I'm happy to field any questions.
And any questions from any board members? Not seeing any, okay, I'm not seeing any questions from board members. Is there any public comment?
There have been no requests.
Coming back to the board, are there any motions or further discussion?
Chair Shaw, we do have a question.
sorry.
Director Padilla.
Sorry, Monica, sometimes it's hard
I'm
for me
sorry.
to navigate the hands. Go ahead, Monica, a question or a motion?
It's a question, and it's just a clarifying question on the approval process. I find myself in the position where I don't have my own board approval to approve this, and I would have to go to my board. So if I were to make a motion, would it have to say a conditional motion, or do I just make a motion to support the amendment? And then it's known that if I don't sign the PGSA, that's how it works. Just remind me what the process is when.
Yeah, it's the latter, Director Padilla. So in this case, the language of the motion and the language of the amendment are such that the board would instruct CC Power to accept the amendment, and the members' individual processes are decoupled. And we have processes in place for what happens if a member approves or does not approve.
Okay, then I will make a motion to move approval of staff's recommendation.
Sonoma will second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any debate or comment on the motion? Seeing any, Madam Clerk, do you want to call the roll?
Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco,
Yes.
PCE,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power Authority.
Yes.
That motion carries. I was instructed not to, well, that Ava Community Energy is abstained and not participating in the vote, correct? Okay.
Correct,
That
yes.
motion passes unanimously from the participating members.
Thank you. So now we're moving on to item 7B, consideration of the draft recommended budget for 26-27, including the budget. Included within the budget is our first operating project, which I think is online or coming online. There's a ribbon cutting soon. Before I ask Mr. Morris to walk through the staff presentation, I just want to take a moment and thank the Budget Committee that met a number of times, kind of walked through this. I appreciate staff's outreach to all of the directors to really help understand and walk through how the budget is compiled, how we are tracking the different phases of projects through joint action across the various members. We've met as the subcommittee a number of times to walk through the proposed budget and work with General Manager Morris and his staff regarding how we're tracking costs, how we're identifying costs that are related to the operating project, those costs that are part of our general administration dues, and then how those costs really follow and track what the board's direction at our board retreat last September, October was. So there's been a lot of work that has gone into it. My preference is that at some point in the development and operation of CC Power, we're meeting and voting on the budget, but I do think at this stage it's still appropriate to share it with the board, get feedback around the information that you're seeing here, making sure that everyone's on the same page with respect to the budget construction, but more importantly, the policy that the budget represents. It's representing the direction of the board with this agency, at least over the next year. So we wanted to share that with you all. I'm hopeful that at the end of this, we're getting really clear feedback. And I want to do that through a motion so that staff and the budget committee know exactly what the board would like us to focus on if there is more work. It may be at the end of this that everyone's comfortable with the budget as presented and the motion might be to approve and move forward. But I do note we have two members that are out. So leave it up to Zach and Shalini to share, if they're ready to do that or would prefer to wait. We've set it up so that we can wait and bring it back one more time. That said, there are certain members that want to make sure that they can get their board's approval to approve dues sooner rather than later. So again, appreciate you letting me add some context to where we are and how we got here. And then General Manager Morris, why don't you give us the staff presentation?
Thank you, Chair Shaw. So thanks to the board for this opportunity to brief you on the draft recommended budget. The general steps we're going to go through are to explain what's in the budget and why, and then have board discussion. And as Chair Shaw indicated, try to be very specific from the board, get very specific direction on either passage or the specific further work that would be desired or needed prior to passage. I also wanted to acknowledge the Budget Ad Hoc Committee, who I know are very busy people and yet gave a lot of time to help here. And the CC Power budget is, it's complicated. There's a labor of love to it. And so I really wanted to thank Chair Shaw, Director Sears, Director Padilla, and Director Marshall for all contributing and helping trying to structure the budget in a way that best fits the needs of the members and is as clear as possible. Just level setting a little bit. So here we are in the process we started back in January and February. We've met with every member and all of the procurement directors. As part of that, we built a work plan. We started with what we called a baseline work plan, and then that turned into a near final work plan that shows up in the budget. So the budget really does reflect a bottoms up, zero-based budgeting approach where we sort of look at the needs very specifically and then make sure that the budget represents that appropriately. Going along with that, we now have this draft recommended budget, and we're here for the first time discussing it with the full board. So I look forward to fielding any questions as we go and seeing where this discussion goes. To provide a bit more context, the CC Power budget is complicated in a few ways. Probably the biggest source of complication is that there are different frames for the budget. So over the years, we've received board direction for what the budget should be representing and portraying. And some of these frames that we've captured in the budget are to have a specific project-based budget that helps members estimate their all-in costs for the year. And then at the same time, to help differentiate for members what the total costs of the budget are versus what the member may need incremental approvals for. And so in trying to do that, we've often differentiated what's already been approved from what and yet is still in the budget and work plan versus what still needs incremental approval. And you'll see that come up later. Additionally, the context of the budget is that CC Power will soon have its first project online, and that project will then carry through for a full year. So all those costs are pass-through costs associated with contracts. And so you'll see the budget jumps in size for those reasons, although really it's just more money moving through CC Power. And additionally, when we look at late in the upcoming fiscal year, we know that additional projects will be coming online or are scheduled to come online. And so by the end of this upcoming budget cycle, we could in theory be really on the cusp of having 3 projects operating under CC Power's structure. And then also there's been a lot of maturation throughout CC Power in the structures we use to work with members and conduct the work. These structures include the board meetings, the working groups, the subcommittees, the gradually growing list of policies and procedures, et cetera. So all of that is now embedded into the work plan and the resourcing models. And then lastly, the context was to align very directly with the board directed strategic priorities and policies. And specifically, the strategic priorities were adopted in December of 2025. And there are 4 of them, and you'll see those come up. They are, again, procurement, emerging tech, asset ownership, and project execution. And then the most relevant policies to govern the budget process have been the budget policy, which was passed in 2024, and then a working capital and carryover policy, which was passed in 2025. So I think that provides some of the context. The way we think about the budget is what's the work first, and then the budget comes second. So the work is comprised of existing authorized projects or things we think will be approved prior to the fiscal year, and then things we think will be teed up for approval within the fiscal year. On the existing side, you see all of the phase 3 already established power project contracts: Tumbleweed, Fish Lake, Ormat, and Willow Rock. And then on phase 2, where we would be working to negotiate a joint action deal that members may want to pursue, we expect some additional projects to launch soon. This would be what I'm referring to as solar and storage project number 1, solar and storage project number 2, and a geothermal project. So all of those projects, there's a lot of work there, and those would require members to opt in. But we do anticipate there'll be enough support for those projects to be up and running as we head into the new fiscal year. So they're included as existing authorized when it comes to the budget. On the annually authorized side, we expect some of the umbrella umbrella bulk buys that we've done the past few years will continue. We call these phase 3s, these recurring phase 3s of bulk buys for subscription services and then computer trainings. And the members will need to opt in if they want to use those, but we do represent those costs in the total budget picture. And then on the phase 2 side, very in line with the strategic priorities, we expect multiple additional phase 2s will get teed up next year, and these are represented in the work plan. The first one is the geothermal strategic origination, where we will continue to work with the 3 counterparties with whom we have these condition precedent type agreements to have those projects gradually translate into more PPA type structures as the project developer achieves certain milestones. And we wanted to extend, or the work plan includes extension of those 3 contracts. There's also forecast work for geothermal PPA, an additional separate geothermal or emerging tech PPA, and then an asset ownership entry strategy work effort. Now that last one is not a PPA pursuit, but it would provide the board and the members with a very concrete proposal for further asset ownership entry pursuits. And so that you can think of as a multi-month strategy project that would occur next year in the work plan. Finally, in phase 1, where we have all the members participate through working groups, we have the all-member solicitation and the related negotiation costs associated with that. We wanted to capture all those costs so that members can budget appropriately. And then we have our phase 1 research and education efforts that help us gear up and identify joint action areas, and that typically feeds into the phase 2 process. And then lastly, on the administrative side, we have the annual G&A. And I'll speak to all of these things from a price point in the coming slides. So what does it all mean? The total budget represented here is $24.9 million in expenses with $5.1 million forecast to come back as market revenues, and that would apply to offset project costs. And that leads to a net expenditures of $19.79 million. This provides you a breakdown between existing authorized and annually authorized and maps directly to the prior slide. And what you can see if you look at the bottom column is that the vast majority of the funding is in existing authorized, 17 million, versus the 2.77 million in annually authorized. And so that really shows that the vast majority of money moving through CC Power under this draft recommended budget would occur in phase 3 and really results from the power projects and the PPAs. Some members want to also know, what does this mean for my CCA? And so we also want to focus on this slide because this informs some of the downstream invoicing that would occur pursuant to any budget approval. So we've separated the whole budget, and you can see that with the bottom right number of 19.792 million into the individual components for each member. And so members who have numbers in that top column that indicates that they're participating in projects coming online that will have PPA payments and then also revenues. And so you can see how that breaks down based on project shares. And then in phase 3, all other costs, that's where we embed the management, the attorney fees, the contract, the scheduling coordinator or bidding optimization functions that would go along with all of the work of shepherding those contract management efforts for phase 3's forward, as well as those smaller bulk buys associated with reports and computer tradings. In phase 2, this is based on members' expressed interest in the various phase 2s that are included in the work plan. It's important to caveat, though, that members still need to opt in. So while this gives you a picture of the total spending under these forecast budget conditions, the members still have the right and need to opt in to any projects before that any funds would be encumbered and associated with the project. Lastly, the phase 1 costs include the all-member solicitation, multiple PPA negotiation costs, and then these research and education efforts, and we allocate that evenly across all the members. Finally, on G&A, we have $177,000 per member for a total of $1.596 million. And I'm going to provide some more color on this. So Chair Shaw, let me know if there's an appropriate need or a need for a break, because we try to sequence it so each slide informs the next one, so I can reference back to these numbers as we go. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of the same slide, but really removes the power contract costs and revenues. So many of you already have approval if you're participating in a power contract for those costs, and you may already just deem them as power costs. So you'll want to know what's incremental to your power costs and revenues, and that's what the purpose of this slide is, to try and distill that for you. So when you remove the existing power costs and contract revenues, you see a total incremental approval amount across all of the members of $4.662 million. And again, you see the G&A at the 177, the phase 1 at 39, and then the members forecast phase 3 and phase 2 costs based on their expressed interest. And we have consulted with all members on that. And again, it's not totally firm because the member does need to opt in to a project once we provide a project opportunity notice. Okay. And then another relevant piece, and I know this can be overwhelming, is do I have carryover? According to our carryover policy, which we passed last November, members should have visibility to any excess funds that sit within their project accounts or that sit as unallocated. And so there's a lot of nuance to carryover. The carryover is finalized at the end of the fiscal year, but to help members understand how much carryover they can expect, we are forecasting it here. And so this gives you a sense of what your carryover estimate or likely carryover amount will be. And I also want to further caveat that some of that carryover will sit within project accounts, and so is not sort of easy to roll over, but a lot of that carryover is in what I would call unallocated carryover, and so really available for the member to receive back or allocate to offset any future invoices. And so for those of you who are doing the math and you want to know, well, if I do want to offset future invoices, what might those invoices be? The bottom table here shows what those invoices are in total. So it gives you your total budget amount and then the incremental approval amount. So Chair Shaw, if I could use 3CE as an example here, 3CE is looking at $303,000 in carryover. The total budget amount they're foreseeing under this draft recommended budget is $594,000, and all of that is incremental approvals. So 3CE might look at this and say, okay, the incremental approval amount would be $594,000, but I know I have carryover of around $303,000. And so that can give you a sense of the cash impact that your CCA would face from approving this draft recommended budget. I'm going to keep going a few more slides and then open it up for discussion. It's really important also to say what's changed and to help you all have context for why this budget shows up the way it does. And so we wanted to provide a year-over-year summary. The main drivers of cost increases in the budget are the full year of power project operations. And you can see that in that left comparison of the tall blue line next to the shorter orange line. Those are the phase 3 expenses, and it really shows that the power contract costs kicking in for a full year ramp up the spending significantly. We also see that the prior year revenues were higher than the proposed revenues, and the reason there was that the prior year revenues included a one-time settlement, and that one-time settlement will not show up in the go-forward revenues. So you see last year's revenues as higher. And it's hard to distill, and I'll provide more information in a second. Phase 2s you see are up a little bit. The phase 1s are down significantly, and I'll explain why. And then G&A is relatively flat. And so where you start to see the cost decreases, we've tightened the scope. We have a smaller scope. We've also reduced the amount of contingency we use in planning. We found that the budget approach we've used the past couple of years, where we're embedding contingency in each specific project, and the goal there was really to keep projects fully budgeted and not subsidizing any other project. But we do realize that that was probably overly conservative, and it yielded more roll carryover than we need. So we've reduced the contingency amounts in the go-forward draft recommended budget. And lastly, there's no further accumulation of working capital. We passed a policy in November on working capital, and so we now have that policy to guide us, and we're not seeking to accrue any additional working capital for CC Power through this draft recommended budget. To give a sense on a member-by-member basis of how it changes year over year, there's quite a bit of noise in this because it really depends on what your CCA indicated they wanted to sign up for last year or was already participating in last year versus what you might want to sign up for this year. So on phase 3 non-project costs, you see that costs are going up. So if it's got parentheses, that means costs are going up. And the drivers there are more operations, changing use of computer trainings and bulk buys. So when we adjust assumptions inside the budget spreadsheet, it shows that these are probably the most updated cost estimates that we can give you for what costs your CCA would incur under phase 3, non-contract or other costs. And then in phase 2, it's a very member-specific change. I could draw attention to Valley here, which is looking at an $88,000 reduction in phase 2 budget costs. And that's based on how many projects Valley signed up for in the budget last year or expressed interest in the budget last year versus this year. Ava, by contrast, you can see a $270,000 increase in phase 2 costs. And that's driven a lot by their expressed interests in this budgeting process into the go forward budget ideas. Lastly, you see the phase 1 costs are down by $51,000 per member. And again, that was through scope and cost management. And then lastly, you see G&A is a relatively small increase of $3,000 per member. Okay. I also just wanted to speak to some of the operational decisions that are reflected in this budget. We look very carefully at managing costs, and in the budget, one of the ways we do that is we differentiate what spending would we really be committed to, or what would we have discretion on. And so we use this lens of discretionary or non-discretionary. So the discretionary spending does provide us with broad ability to not spend, and it's really based on project go, no-goes or member interests and work scope. In some cases, we tag resources like potential hires as discretionary so that we would only hire or pursue consulting support for a project if, in fact, a project is going to move forward. And the reason we do that is we want to budget for the project's cost, but we don't want to spend any money we don't need to. So the discretionary spending lens helps us do that. And then I wanted to say further in the FTE and consultant use, inside the budget memo, there's a section on the FTEs and the consultants, and I think we all want to make sure we resource CC Power carefully, especially in these early years. And so what you see in the numbers is that the year-over-year number of staff is flat, and the year-over-year number of recurring consultants is flat. There are some cost increases, though, associated with personnel and the consultants, and that is driven by inflation, how some of the FTEs would be sitting in their seat for more of the year, and then expanding accounting needs. So that's really what drives some of the changes in the FTE and consultant use costs, that some of which is still discretionary, but some of which is non-discretionary. And then one last important thing, our budget is a 12-month picture that uses accrual-based accounting, really, which means revenues and costs associated with work occurring in that period. At the end of the next fiscal year, which would be June 30th, 2027, we would be heading into the summer of 2027, and we know that additional projects will be coming online shortly after this budget window. And so we wanted to also notify you that not included in the budget is the likelihood that we will invoice according to our phase 3 contracts to seed project operating accounts for 2 projects. Now, inside the contracts, we have the authority to invoice to hold funds for any of these projects, but we usually don't do that until the project is close to being online. The reason is we don't want to hold the members' cash unproductively. And so what we do is we have a 90-day rule, which is 90 days prior to COD, we would go and invoice members for their deposit funds needed for that project. When we're more than 90 days out, we typically just invoice for the annual costs associated with contract management, and those costs are reflected in the budget. But I also wanted to provide this additional information because it does affect the cash outlays that you may want to plan for. Okay. Identical to last year, we have an invoicing plan that goes along with the budget. This invoicing plan was developed and approved by the ad hoc and the board last year, and is as follows: that when the budget is passed, we invoice for GNA upfront full amount. For phase 1 upfront full amount. For phase 2, we wait and we get final information on the carryover. And to do that, we need to close the fiscal year. So it's really not until late Q3 that we will have this information. And then we would invoice for the phase 2 amount as expressed in this budget. And then and funds that are not encumbered to any project, we treat as unallocated, and the member can deploy those funds into any projects that they activate. And then lastly, phase 3 is in a way the easiest invoicing wise, because each phase 3 contract has its own invoice structure. And so we just invoice based on the project agreement. A final subcomponent is that the Tumbleweed project will be online, and embedded in the budget is a lot of detail and rigor for operating Tumbleweed for the full year. Tumbleweed is the 8-hour storage project coming. It's actually online already, and it will enter our portfolio starting June 1st. And so pursuant to our contract, board approval of a Tumbleweed specific budget is required. And so I wanted to just quickly share that. And then we have time for approval here, but we also have the option to approve it. So on the next slide is the Tumbleweed specific information by member. And you see members who don't participate have zeros, and the members who have participated are exposed to these revenues and costs based on their project shares. And we also have expressed this in the accounting categories that we know many of you use. And our hope is that this framing should make it easy for any invoiceable costs and for your teams to understand that and know where and how to place and anticipate the costs for operating Tumbleweed. Okay. And then, so Chair Shaw, I know I've been speaking for a while, and I hope it was productive and useful and clear. Just to reiterate what Director Shaw and the ad hoc's perspective is that we recognize this is complicated. We really welcome a chance to discuss and receive any feedback. And we're unsure at this time how ready members of the board will be to pass it or to specify further work they want. And so if there is a comfort in approving the budget today, some draft motions are provided that the board can review in the moment here. So with that, Chair Shaw, I'm happy to hand it back to you and then be available for any questions.
Thank you, Alex. Again, I really appreciate the work that you and your staff did to put that together. And I thought that was a very thorough and very clear presentation. So I really appreciate that as well.
Thank you.
At this time, I'll take questions from members of the board.
And Chair Shaw, if I may, we might want to start with other members of the ad hoc in case they had perspectives to share or additional background they thought would be relevant to help the board.
Monica agreed. She's in. Director Padilla, your question, comment.
Yeah, both. First of all, thank you to General Manager Morris for pulling this together and really telling that kind of compelling story as to how we've evolved and what is going into the budget for this coming fiscal year. I had some requests as part of the audit committee, and for the most part, I think all of my questions were answered. I do think that this is still an evolving process. I should say that because I was part of the ad hoc committee, and I know that there's still questions. And it's something that as CC Power matures, I think they can really kind of benefit from looking at other public agencies and how they report their budget, including the changes from one fiscal year to the next fiscal year, and how budgets track relative to actual expenditures throughout the year as well. I know that many of us as managers or CEOs of our respective CCAs have gone through that process too, and our budgets have evolved over time as well. And so I really think that should be the next kind of iteration or focus of the budget ad hoc committee, is to really focus on reporting throughout the year, so that next year when we get to this place, it's so much easier. But yeah, I think really if I were to have any questions, it was going to be around the incremental difference between last year's budget and this year's budget, excluding the pass-through costs related to phase 3 projects. And so I appreciate your waterfall chart that showed kind of the incremental differences. But if you could just kind of hone in on that, it looked like if I did the math, the cost increase from last year's budget to this year's budget is roughly $68,000, excluding the pass-through projects. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
In total on net, yeah.
Okay. All right. And then to date and projected through the balance of this current fiscal year, how are we tracking on actual expenses relative to budget?
Yeah, good question. So I know it's not timed well, Director Padilla. Later in the general manager report, you'll see a forecast of where we're going to be at the end of the year. We are underspending significantly this year. A lot of that is based on the fact that some of the planned joint action projects have not launched. So the budget included those projects as discretionary. Those funds have not been spent. And so you'll see, I'd say, material underspending, especially on the discretionary side. Everywhere else, you'll see spending mostly on track. And I'll share those later in the GM report. Does that help, or do you need more specificity than that?
Well, I guess of those things that you're categorizing as discretionary, those are related to phase 2 projects that weren't launched. That's the money that you've identified could potentially carry over to next fiscal year. Is that the sum of that, or is it other expenses that didn't materialize in this current fiscal year?
It's primarily phase 2 funds that would all carry over. There's a few other drivers though. One was that in phase 1, and I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but I think it's helpful to know phase 1, we also have reviewed how we scoped some of the work last year and tightened the scopes. In particular, we know now that we had a concept last year of looking for really large projects. We call them mega projects. And we thought we might need to do some additional phase 1 work to identify the projects and get them up for consideration for the members. Turns out we weren't, there was a lot of gyration in federal policy and things changed quickly on us. So some of the phase 1 budget also was not used. Those dollars don't roll over according to the working capital policy, but they do end up meeting the working capital needs. And then going forward, the board will be able to see if CC Power has sufficient working capital and then what to do so it stops collecting working capital. But that would be outside of this budget cycle.
Okay. All right, those were my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Padilla. Director Sears.
Yeah, just wanted to add Monica's appreciation to Alex and the staff. I think that each time as the ad hoc committee, it seemed like there was additional clarity. I think the questions that were generated within the ad hoc committee kind of structure did help to clarify and to really kind of hone in on kind of the important component pieces of the budget. There are, as everybody knows, there's a number of different sort of plates that are spinning here. And I think that over the past couple of years, as the budget processes have kind of evolved, it's getting closer to a clear kind of representation of what the actual spends are, where those kind of cost centers are, and how that's being managed. So I wanted to share my appreciation for the committee, but also the work that Alex and team have put into this. I expect that as we go into future budget cycles, that will continue to take place, and I do support Monica's point about sort of tracking as we go through the year, sort of actuals against budget. I think that is helpful. It's a good check. So appreciate that. I don't really have any specific questions, but other than to say that the questions that I think were raised in the ad hoc committee, by and large, have been met here and answered, to my satisfaction. So with that, I'll just state that I'm comfortable with moving forward today with adoption of the budget. And when the time comes, I'm happy to make a motion.
Thank you, Mitch. Let's go to Zach, and then Barb, and then Howard. And so Zach, go ahead.
Hi. I'll say that San Jose would like to defer voting on the budget until next month. In part because Lori's not here, and just generally feels like there's still a number of moving parts and some things we could sharpen the pencil on, or clarify what dollar amount begets what sort of milestone. A couple specific questions though, Alex. I think you said that the staff numbers were flat. Can you just confirm that this current budget doesn't call for any literal hiring of any vacancies which might be unfilled at the moment?
So I can confirm CC Power in the current structure has 5 staff and 2 vacancies, and the proposed budget has 5 staff and 2 vacancies. So just to be really clear, I don't know if the keeping 2 vacancies that's meaningful to your question, correct?
Yeah, I think we would probably support milestones that would result in filling those vacancies, and that maybe limiting the budget approval before those milestones are hit.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's a great point, Zach. So thank you for your comment. Inside the memo, there's a section on this, and it speaks to how those 2 vacancies might be filled. And I'll just elaborate for a quick second. One of them we're calling, for very boring title, we call it Project Manager B. And so that really is a position that I would think of as contingent on certain projects moving forward. And inside the budget, we're able to assign staff time and costs specifically to projects. So when we look at the potential projects, we're looking at how we would resource them. And so Project Manager B, in a way, is really contingent on work moving forward before we would go out to market and hire. And then also we can direct assign those costs, but it doesn't have to be a full-time position. It could also be consultants or other solutions that seem to make sense given the work. And so from the budget standpoint, we're trying to eyeball the right amount of dollars but we recognize there's still downstream operating decisions, and we want to be careful. That said, I understand your concern and desire for milestone-based decisions. I would just add that the other position is what we've labeled as a finance manager. And that position we had in the budget for the current cycle. We have not hired for it. And we wanted to make sure we had visibility to project online dates, things like the tumbleweed amendment that occurred earlier in this meeting to better foresee when and how much work would be occurring at CC Power. I think we now have a visibility for the finance manager that a likely structure for that role would be to have a sort of, in some ways, very part-time fractional CFO who helps with the money side and the tracking and the presentation and the forecasting of dollars. And so I wouldn't see that as a full FTE. And instead, the way I'm looking at it is as a fractional CFO consultant or part-time staffer. And I have a job description for that. So if we do have more time to review, I'm happy to share that information and additional perspectives on how I'm thinking that will meet members' needs.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that information, Alex. Just in the interest of time, I want to keep, so this is a budget discussion. It's the funds that are in the budget. We're not, the detail around the operational decisions and decision-making around how we're going to execute that budget. There's lots of questions there that we're going to address throughout the year as decisions come forward to the board. But I want, to the best that we can, stay at budget and policy budget discussion. Any other questions, Zach? I didn't want to cut you off.
No, just the Willow Rock, I believe the number was 167,000, including 90,000 of staff time. But both of those numbers sounded heavy for a COD 2030 project. And I think we would hope that again, we hope that we can talk about this for another month and tighten that down.
Okay, we can take a look at that.
Director Hale.
I appreciate the work that this represents. Of course, I also will associate with myself with some of the comments of my colleagues. I have an in the weeds question for you, Alex. On PDF page 56, there's a chart and a description of other operating expenses. There's a 162% increase in insurance. And I see the footnote there, but I'd like to understand, I'd like you to take a minute just to explain a little bit more about what's driving that increase and what the in particular, what the employee insurance cost increases represent, please.
Yeah, certainly. So that caught my eye as well, Director Hale. So I did look at that and we provided this footnote. So underneath that insurance accounting bucket, there's a couple different types of insurance. There is employee health insurance, and we pay, according to the CC Power benefits plan, a fixed monthly amount, and that won't change. But if we add employees, and again, it should be flat for the year, that sort of just ripples through in the insurance number. The biggest driver for insurance increases is twofold. We source insurance through a broker for the projects, and we have insurance requirements for each of the projects. Some of that insurance requirements are D&O insurance. And so when there's more money flowing through the organization, my understanding from talking with the insurance broker is that the insurance costs go up. And then the other component is we just have more insurance requirements associated with the contracts. So I'm happy to further elaborate on that and break that open to see more if helpful, but really it is driven largely by, or almost entirely by the contracts and the power contracts.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I don't need further drilling down.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Hale. Director Chang.
Thanks. First of all, I just appreciate the work by GM Morris and the ad hoc committee on the budget. Really appreciate the level of detail in what Alex, you had shared. I think it really helpful as I had questions on certain numbers. You can kind of drill into the various phase 2 or phase 1 projects that it's associated with. A couple really quick questions. First one is, I am curious as a follow-up on the FTE question with two vacant FTE. I'm just curious, where's that carried within the budget? Is that sort of within the various phase allocations, or is that under G&A, and where would that be included?
Yeah, this is a complexity. So just to summarize, we try a sort of principle from the CC Power budgeting has been to make sure there's a cost causation based allocation. And so from the get-go, when I've been starting the budgeting, we try to attribute staff costs very carefully. So within the budget, we have methodologies for tagging it to the right areas. So in this case, I can try to remember the exact numbers here. So when we look at this finance manager position, we know that they're going to work to do pretty light recurring work on each of the power projects each month. And they'll help with financial reports and sort of G&A type work. So their costs get allocated to the various buckets through formulas. And so we approach each staff position in that way. And then, so we have a very sort of specific allocation for each staffer based on what we expect their work will be. Further, for some of the consultants, we can allocate it more generally, similar to staff, or we can assign it directly into a sub-project like a phase 2. And a good example of that is with legal costs. We can pretty specifically forecast legal costs associated with PPA developments, and we embed those in the phase 2 costs directly. So the purpose there is to make sure that no members paying for services they don't want, no members cross-subsidizing anybody else's work, and you have a really clear representation of what the cost will be. And again, it's an all-in budget. The costs for attorney fees often are discretionary, so we don't spend that money unless we need, but the budget does represent that potential spending.
Okay. I take that to mean the two vacant FTEs are a mix of some of that is probably under G&A and some of that is allocated to the various phases based off of your typical, allocation methodology. Is that
Yes.
a fair assumption? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Got it. And then my other comment, which I did run by you, Alex, and I thought it was worth just emphasizing, is just I have a question around the allocation of personnel costs through the phases. I on the one hand, I appreciate that provides some color on, well, for this particular phase 2 effort, it kind of takes up this much staff time. On the other hand, I have a little concern on, well, if we didn't move forward on, say, that phase 2 effort, there's a mix of discretionary and non-discretionary. So if we just didn't do it, how do you cover personnel costs, which are non-discretionary? You'd have to reallocate that somehow, or perhaps you stay with this current allocation process, but the reality is you didn't actually move forward on that effort. So that created some concern for me on the methodology and what that would mean for reallocation. But also just generally speaking, as we manage our budget, at least for AVA, we really carry all personnel costs, G&A costs, as sort of a separate line item to make sure that is clear and it's obvious in that showing that those are non-discretionary costs. Of course, we want to make sure we're all conscious of sort of staffing and those types of overhead costs. So that maybe that's a recommendation for me to not necessarily do a personnel allocation, but rather truly make all of the phase 2 costs consider discretionary costs as a change in methodology. That may be too much to change at this stage for this budget, and I think that was your response to me. But I just wanted to note that that was a recommendation for me, perhaps going to next year's budget for consideration.
Excellent idea. May I respond quickly, Director Chang?
Yeah, please.
You're absolutely right that cost allocation of personnel into phase 2 projects that may or may not launch is a source of uncertainty in cost recovery. And so we recognize that, and we approach, I think, a lot of our spending very cautiously for that reason. Additionally, though, the non-project working capital policy that was passed does address that a little bit in terms of how much reserves is the wrong word, but how much working capital we would need in this unlikely case where we need to recover additional costs. And so it's addressed through that. But, I like what you're saying, that maybe we could find a cleaner way to do it.
Yeah. And just to layer on there, to the extent you did move and change methodologies, certainly that would warrant some revisiting of the allocation of membership dues or G&A costs as well. So certainly want to put that out there for consideration. So that was it on that point. Then one other just comment, maybe more as a follow-up, but just I think about this budget in context of also sort of authorization for contracts and moving forward. And I just wanted to flag, I'm not fully aware of for CC Power, what is the GM's authorization to say sign certain contracts versus just move forward on anything that's included under the budget. Obviously for our agency, we have certain policies that allow us to move forward on certain budgetary expenses. But also, even if it is covered under the budget, we still have to bring forward specific contracts. So just wanted to flag it. To the extent that's not clear for you, want to make sure that there's some clarity on sort of process so we can go operationalize the budget following this. And I wanted to note that I wasn't totally clear on that. So.
Okay. Yeah, the way we've been approaching that the last few years is there's a delegation of authority to the general manager for $100,000. We only execute on spending if it's within the approved budget, just so you know. And then further, we'll report back or seek the appropriate approvals for anything above the delegated authority. And then there's a further control is for a lot of the spending, it's informed by either project advisory subcommittees or member opt-ins. And so we still have that kind of additional control from the members before spending occurs.
Got it. Thanks. That's it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Chang. Any other questions for staff? Okay, then I'll bring it back to the board for potential motion. There were a lot of questions there. I know, Mitch, you said that you were ready to approve. We heard some comments around just trying to drill down in specific costs and taking some additional time, but interested in the will of the board here. But if we do want to move forward with the budget, we would have to have a motion for the budget and a separate motion to approve the Tumbleweed project budget as well.
Yeah, and Stephanie, maybe to facilitate discussion, if you could pull up the slides, that would give them a sense of what they want to do. I'm sorry, was someone still speaking?
No, I was just going to add for the record, there have been no requests to speak on this general. If we're moving into motions, there's been no request from the public to speak. So I just wanted to add that for the record.
Sure. I was going to call after we had a motion because I don't know the public knows what to comment on just yet, but.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Is there a particular slide, Alex, that you wanted to see?
Yeah, it's slide 16, please. Actually, no, it's slide 19. Sorry. So, Chair Shaw, we put these together just to facilitate the board's consideration, but no expectation on whether the board's ready to approve or not.
I think I did not see it. I'm going to go to Director Hale. I'm sorry, Howard, if you were the first one to raise your hand, but I'm going to go to Barb.
Thank you. I think I heard at least one member request that we not move motion 2. And I'd like to understand, I believe Director Morris indicated that a vote today or at the next meeting would still be comfortable. Am I correct in understanding that? No harm to not taking up motion 2 today?
Correct.
Okay. Well, I think I'm in favor of affording our colleagues that courtesy. If it's not a negative, if there's no negative impact from the GM's perspective. Thank you.
I would only ask for the benefit of the subcommittee that if we're delaying it for the courtesy of our colleague, and I'm hugely supportive of doing that, then that's fine. But if there's additional work that the board would like the subcommittee and staff to work on between now and the next meeting, I would like that to be part of a motion so we have clear direction about what we're working on so that we're not sort of moving in between without clear direction from the board. And I'll go next to Director Chang.
I was going to echo very similar comments to Member Hale to provide San Jose the courtesy of review it and taking action on this next month. But I also appreciate your request for specific feedback to work on over the next month. And so from that standpoint, I'll just share. I'm generally comfortable with what's included under the budget and the various priorities that are identified. With that said, I did just want to highlight that we're in a pretty tight and challenging financial environment as a sector over the next year, and certainly very cost conscious as I am for our agency going through our own budget process. Any potential changes on this, I don't think are monumental. With that said, if there is any opportunity to sort of sharpen the pencil on anything and really consider what's a necessary expenditure, and perhaps just taking the approach of, I know General Morris is always very reasonable with wanting to include a little bit of contingency and buffer on items. And for that reason, I think we usually end years with excess budget that's been approved that's not been utilized, to maybe consider tightening that up to the extent it's possible, so that we can all be mindful of what we're including in our agency budgets to make sure that's as conservative a number as possible in terms of what we're moving forward with. So that would be one request I have over the course of the next month in consideration to allow San Jose to join as well.
Thank you, Howard. Director Padilla.
Yeah, certainly echo the sentiments from Director Hale and Director Chang. I think that even if San Jose doesn't have specific changes they would like to see in a budget that comes back in a month, maybe it gives an opportunity for them to spend a little more time to get some questions answered behind the scenes. And I think that's also part of this process as well. But if we are going to allow for more time, which I certainly support bringing this next month, if I would ask that perhaps General Manager Morris, that you could maybe do the budget to actual comparison for fiscal year 25-26 versus the proposed budget. And I also want to echo what Howard said about, yeah, if there are any opportunities to defer expenses or to trim expenses, I think this is a year that I would definitely support CC Power doing that as well. Thank you.
Director Sears?
Yeah, just real quickly, I'm happy to postpone until next month.
So I'm going to take a stab at this, and then because I think the feedback, and I've been trying to take notes. So it sounds like there would be potentially a motion to approve the tumbleweed cost now, and then a separate motion to direct the staff and the budget ad hoc committee to review the cost related to Willow Rock consultants and expenses, to review expenses generally for either deferment or places that we can determine that costs aren't necessarily incurred in this fiscal year. And then third, to do a budget to actual comparison, and then a comparison of that to the current proposed budget, so that we're seeing that we're actually expending costs as planned and how that might influence the next budget. That's what I'm hearing. I'll go to Director Zach. I'm gonna mispronounce your last name. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna.
It's Strike, no problem.
I knew that, but as soon as I looked at your name, I got fearful. Director Strike.
I was just going to add to your list. Could we more specifically define what we're trying to get to with the BTA budget? I see that Ava is carrying by far the lion's share. Howard, maybe I should just ask you why you're comfortable, but that was something that came up on our team side.
Happy to share my perspective on that. Project ownership is one initiative that I think Ava supports highly, and comfortable taking a larger percentage share of that as a result. We see CC Power as a great conduit to sort of diversify that risk and work with our fellow CCAs on that type of sort of strategic initiative. With that said, I think that to be more specific on my comment earlier, that may be an area that we can sharpen our pencil a little bit, and that's part of the request perhaps to GM Morris to really just think about, is that the true estimate of the expectation? Is there a little contingency there? Is there an opportunity for some of the out of pocket expenses, legal or otherwise, that maybe could be trimmed? Again, I don't want to do that despite the and risk the effort, of course, but just wanted to make that request in the context of making sure that's what's really necessary to be successful in the effort.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Director Cyphers.
I would, in the interest of getting a reaction, move the tumbleweed motion 1 and separately move that staff hear the general guidance around budget that's been aired over the last 3 commenters, take that into account, and that the board agrees that it is unlikely we will bring substantial additional changes to the next meeting. How about that?
Well, I was almost going to second that, Director Cyphers. I certainly second the first part of your motion to support the tumbleweed budget. I think, and I was with you on the second, except for the last part where you said, and don't expect substantive changes.
I withdraw that second part. So general guidance heard over the comments, that's fine. And those are 2 separate motions, by the way.
Let's take the first motion, which I don't know, Monica, was there a second? Let's take the tumbleweed motion first. So there's a motion to approve the tumbleweed project budget and costs as presented, and there is a second. I want to pause and see if there's any clarification or comments on the motion and second as presented.
Can I clarify before I second the first motion? Is that okay with San Jose to move forward with the first motion?
Yes, we're fine to move number 1.
Then I will second that first motion.
Let's go to public comment on the first motion. Is there any public comment?
We have no general public comment.
Okay. General Manager Morris, do you need clarification on the motion?
Yeah, just some slight clarification. Yeah, it's probably manageable, but any change we make may also change the staff allocations to tumbleweed, which would therein change the tumbleweed budget. So doing these separate may not be, may just require a lot of sort of manual work to make sure that the total dollars match up properly. I'm confirming right now if we need the tumbleweed budget passed today, and we do not. So it may make sense to hold off on both until May. Although I like the idea of productively moving something if everybody's ready.
Okay. Well, it sounds like what the motion was around may not be actualized if the other things change. So, Director Cyphers, I would suggest that we withdraw the motion.
I accept that's prudent. I withdraw.
Okay. So, Director Cyphers, do you want to restate your second motion?
Before I state it, my intent is that we have provided some general guidance to staff. I think I might want to defer to somebody else who's interested in seeing more significant changes. I'm more generally okay with where staff landed. So maybe I'll turn this over to somebody who's interested in seeing more change happen. How about that? So I'll release that.
So again, just a summary of the changes that I've heard discussed. Reviewing costs associated with consultants and staffing around the Willow Rock project. Reviewing the BTA cost allocations and assumptions. Reviewing also just a a general review of the entire budget in terms of deferring costs or reducing costs where possible, doing a budget to actuals for 25, 26 and comparing that to the proposed. Those are the four primary areas. And maybe if anyone wants to add to that, but what I would suggest is I ask General Manager Morris, is the direction around that? Do you feel like you have clear direction around those things if we were to take a budget or a motion to say, go back, do a little work, come back in May?
Yeah, certainly. And that makes sense. I can continue to scrutinize it, look very carefully at it. I think to the point on some of the projects, there's a scope of work for each of the projects that includes areas where we expect to use external consultants. What we were afraid of is to not have sufficient dollars in the pool to get the work done. Yet we don't want to over collect, so we can estimate the work for each of those projects and try and make sure it gets done. And so I can, and I think just to warn everyone, given the allocation, if you reduce $1 of spending, it can flow differently to different members. So in some cases, it may just shift costs on a specific project and not change the overall budget very much. And in other cases, it can kind of shrink the dollars pretty minimally across the board. And that's because for a cost that's allocated in all these areas, you can remove it from the total dollars, but what shows up in your individual amount might be just a percentage share of that, and it can be quite small. So happy to do that. And I think it could lower the budget amount by a little bit.
Sounds like yes, the direction would be clear, and two, that would be the first part of your presentation in May.
Okay.
Okay. Director Padilla.
Well, if you need a motion, which I'm not sure you need a motion, but if you need a motion,
I want a motion so that it's very clear what we're asking staff to do. I don't want staff to go back and bring something back and say, we didn't hear the motion. So I want to be very clear as a board and give very clear direction so that we're all moving the same page.
Then I will make a motion to have staff come back after reviewing the request that Chair Shaw has laid out, the 4 points. Do you want me to repeat them, Rob?
No, I think we have them. Alex, okay. I think you have them. Yes.
And to come back to the May board meeting with a proposal for the budget.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Any questions or debate on the motion? Let's go to public comment on the motion.
There have been no requests to speak.
All right, let's take a vote.
Ava Community Energy,
Yes.
Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power Authority.
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. And I just want to take a moment and say, although that's a tough conversation to go through, two things. One, it's an important conversation to have here together. So we've identified areas that we want to see clarity. We've given staff that clear direction. Staff knows what we're asking them to do. And then two, from staff's perspective, everyone appreciates the work that you all did. We understand how difficult this is. So I know that staff is listening to this feedback and saying, okay, we know where we've got to focus, but it's not a comment necessarily or reflection on the work that's been done. So really appreciate all of the work. And I know I'm talking on behalf of all my colleagues that it's a lot of work. We really appreciate you doing that. And we know that as we come back in May, we'll be able to answer these questions and be able to clearly identify where the board's focus and attention is. So thank you all for going through that with me. Let's go to item number 7C, which is an informational item. So a brief update, General Morris, on the fall member report.
Great, thank you. Here's an easy one. Thanks for sharing, Stephanie. So special thanks to Silicon Valley, who has agreed to host our 2026 member forum. As you know, last year we had a meeting near Yosemite, and we were able to tour some San Francisco facilities. and focus on strategic priorities. This year, we're going to be doing a much pared down version. The plan is to meet in Silicon Valley at their offices from noon to 5 with an optional reception and board dinner. And the agenda will be provided later, but it's going to enable discussion of key topics, probably on some of the strategic priorities that we know will be ripening by the fall when this would occur. So we have put a hold on your calendars, and we look forward to getting together in person on October 29th.
Thank you, Monica and Silicon Valley. Go to item 7D. Thank you.
So this is just information I wanted to share. So I'm going to run through a handful of slides that I think will also be relevant for some of the budget discussion. So first is the upcoming phase twos. The way we do this is we issue a project opportunity notice, and we tell everybody what's the scope, what are the specific costs, how much would it cost, and what's involved, and the members can opt in. In the next month, we're going to have 3 phase twos we expect to launch. The all-member RFO that occurred starting in December yielded areas of joint action, specifically projects that members are going to want to pursue. And so we're working with the counterparties to get them in exclusivity. And then we would start a negotiation, working with the interested members. So all other projects have been released from holds and consideration. So those are all back in the market. And these phase twos will occur very quickly. And then this would also be a time members can use their phase 2 unallocated funds. And so we'll provide instructions for how you do that. So in a sense, if CC Power has some of your funds, which we do, and I can share that information with you individually, you can roll those funds in to cover the cost of these phase 2s. So there'd be no incremental out-of-pocket invoices for the members. Okay, moving on. Tumbleweed is looking good. So the Tumbleweed project is now online, and our contract officially starts June 1st. We have all indications this is the first 8-hour battery in CAISO. So that's going to draw some additional interest in the project. Some of the milestones that have been met, the site inspection, the notices that are required per our contract, a completed CAISO capacity test and operation capacity test. The RA supply plan was submitted to the CAISO and PUC. The CAISO activated commercial operations, and we have updated letters of credit in the works. And performance assurance. So a lot of the work is unfolding now, and it's certainly becoming real as the project gets online. And I wanted to credit the counterparty, Rev Renewables. They've been really good and forthright with all of the information sharing we've requested of them. So this is going very well. A few more pieces on Tumbleweed. Next slide. It's not done. So we've been working extensively with members on operations preparation. This is occurring through a protocol and a procedure we have under the Operations Advisory Subcommittee. So the operation account has now been funded. The budget is through CC Power's annual budget, so we know we'll get to that next month. The Operations Advisory Subcommittee has now approved multiple procedures that we use, and these work really at the staff-to-staff level with your staff on implementing this through CC Power. So resource adequacy, outage management, and new resource implementation. And then some areas we're still finalizing are the settlements procedure and then a scheduling and bidding procedure. Although I want to emphasize we've made a lot of progress on these areas, and they're close to final. And so we're planning a dry run of the settlements process for the first monthly invoice, and those first monthly invoices will not occur until early July. So really the project starts operating per our contract in June. And so then the sort of recurring billing cycle starts thereafter in July. One more slide on Tumbleweed. Oh, 2 more actually. So scheduling and bidding. We're almost done with a bunch of critical work with service providers. The scheduling coordinator, we've been working extensively with them, and there's one last step, which is to get the parent guarantee. So that's in the works. And then on market bidding, we've been working with the preferred vendor that the members selected here. And so to hone and perfect the bidding strategy we're landing on, the remaining steps, which are all in progress, are a backcast analysis, confirming and vetting the strategy for risk tolerance, and then sort of confirming that that translates to bidding strategies that as it's supposed to. So this work's happening. I wanted to credit your teams and then also the CC Power staff who've been working diligently on this. And then lastly, on Tumbleweed, there's an opportunity to celebrate a little bit. On June 18th, there'll be a ribbon cutting from approximately 11 to 2. This is going to be in Kern County, so it could be warm. And the general agenda is to arrive a little early, have some speakers, lunch and networking, site tour, photo ops, and continued networking. We've been working closely with Rev, and we've also worked closely with the participating members. And so if you're interested to attend, please let us know. There is limited space, and we'd welcome a chance for others to attend. But I want to warn everybody that there's a very tight agenda, so probably not too much opportunity for making remarks, although there will be some limited time for that. So I look forward to having the members there and you all seeing the project you initiated years ago serve and enter into your portfolio. Shifting to other projects. So we have these other projects. ORMAT, wanted to mention that we're still working very actively with ORMAT on the portfolio of projects. One project that we were hoping would be a candidate was this Crescent Valley project, and that's no longer indicated by ORMAT to be included in the portfolio. So we're actively trying to dialogue with them on what else will go into the portfolio and to get a project notice to go into the portfolio. On the HydroStore Willow Rock project, as a reminder, that's the compressed air storage project. So that's sort of stabilized now. It's approved by all members. The development security has been received. And so the next step is to get the intra-member contract called the PPSA and the BLIPTA out for signatures. And then we'll be invoicing members for the phase 3 contract management costs for this year, which were February to June. So those will be very small invoices, but we want to get those out and then have everybody's project accounts up and tracked. And then lastly, on the GEOD agreements, these are the condition precedent agreements with Atlantica, XGS, and Zanskar. So those are all signed and announced. We had a few inquiries from the press to better understand those. And as part of that now, there's a discussion amongst the participating members on IPE points and how we can continue to work with those developers to turn those contracts into PPAs. Okay, let's move on. Financial updates. So this came up earlier. How are we doing year to date and where are we going to end the year? So I'll share some pictures in the coming slides, but the spending versus budget, overall, it's significant underspending versus the budget. The major drivers for underspending were in Tumbleweed, where we forecast 3 months of operations and it's only going to be 1 month. So that's a big underage. And then the phase 2s that did not activate. In the budget last year, we forecast several phase 2s that it turns out were not relevant or ripe to launch. So we issued no project opportunity notices. And then we have held off on FTEs that were within the budget, sort of waiting to get better visibility there. So all of that contributes to these significant underages, but on the contracts themselves, I'd say we're mostly on track. And then other financial matters that show up in the financial updates are on the working capital. So the last year was the last year where there was some anticipated accumulation of working capital through the budget. The Tumbleweed operating account is now fully seated, so that is significant invoicing and then project, money tracking associated with CC Power. And then members now all have unallocated phase 2 dollars, and I've shared those individually with members recently. So let's go to the next slide and see what it shows. So let's focus first on the left side. You can see that we broke the underages into categories. And on personnel, you see that we're underspending, but not, massively. And so that's really the underages there just relate to us holding off on hiring versus the approved FTEs. On project overhead and professional services, though, you see significant underages. And those are because a lot of the work that's embedded in those categories was related to phase 2s, and actually same with legal. And so these were all areas of spending we forecast to provide that all-in spending picture. But then when the projects don't launch, it shows up as a significant underage. And so each one of those projects also, we had included contingency, and in draft recommended budget, we've stopped doing that to such a degree because we think it was overly conservative and ended up with these significant underages. So we're really on pace to have significant underages at the end of the year. And if you shift over onto the right table, the bottom right cell is kind of the most meaningful. And what it shows is that total spending excluding PPA operations is going to be 49% of the budget. So that's a pretty significant underage, and I take that pretty seriously. And we've looked really at why. And as I said, a lot of it goes back to not launching these phase twos. And it also highlights that with the uncertainty of what's going to launch, we really do want to be cautious with triggering FTEs or other non-discretionary spending. And so I think it enforces the findings that the board was considering earlier in the budget discussion. One more picture here. Next slide. We also wanted to just break it apart by some of the spending areas. And probably the easiest way to digest this is on the right side. You see that G&A in phase one is, call it 60% of plan, and that'll be by the end of the year. Geo Pursuits is low. Part of Geo Pursuits was that, similar to many of these projects, we anticipated a lot of legal or consulting fees that it turns out weren't needed. So any excess funds in Geo Pursuits then roll over for the members and are available. Willow Rock was a project that is basically a full 100% spending. That was to convert that project into a phase three. So what that shows is we've stopped the phase two project, and now we'll have a very small phase three component to that project, and we'll invoice for that. And then the sort of more steady beat projects, Ormat, Fish Lake, and Tumbleweed, are all coming in to the good, under the plan, but not significantly under. So Chair Shaw, I'll keep going, but just in case there are questions, I'm happy to come back to that. I also wanted to take the board back for a second to last November, where we talked about strategic priorities and how those should inform a strategic plan update. So the update is in progress. It's taking the form of a 5-year picture of CC Power with some broad goals by strategic priority area. And those priorities are fixed. And so now it's really translating the priorities into a plan. And we have vetted and confirmed that the draft recommended budget will align with the strategic plan that we're amending. And we look forward to board discussion of this. I think this is a really important one because it highlights that CC Power is focused on work that the board wants. And it gives us a general sense of how we'll approach that work and what we're going to try to accomplish over the coming 5-year period. Okay, one more slide, I think. And then we last met in January, so it's been a little bit. So this is similar to an earlier discussion. I always report out if the GM used his signing authority in any way. And so some of the work that's been completed or conducted under this authority is listed here. And I don't think there's anything too worth elaborating on, but I'm happy to answer any questions on this.
Any questions from board members? Not seeing any. Alex, I just one question, the office sublet. What is that sublet space for? Where is it?
Yeah, so in the budget in the current year, there was a plan to start to get CC Power a very small office. So I researched it, I looked at a bunch of options in the Sacramento area. We've landed with a sort of single office sublet that has a conference room and additional workspace available for CC Power staff should and when we meet in Sacramento. And so that's now up and running. It's a very low risk month-to-month lease that we've signed. And so we actually have that carried forward in the draft recommended budget as well. And I'm using it. And I was originally General Counsel Nelson and I were going to take the meeting from that space today, although it turned out we weren't able to do it. But so we'll start using that space going forward.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members on the GM report? All right, that was an informational item as well, so I don't think we need a motion. Is there any other business for today? Okay. I don't like motions to adjourn, so I think we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your time and patience today. Director Padilla?
Did I miss the announcements? Board announcements?
I guess, did we skip item number 8? Now's a good time to take board announcements. Are there any announcements?
I would like to announce that yesterday we heard from S&P that our rating, they affirmed our A rating, but changed us from stable outlook to positive outlook. A good sign.
Ooh,
That is a great sign.
jealous.
Thank you.
I have a positive outlook on Silicon Valley Clean Energy as well. I just want to share that. So.
Oh. Ditto, Howard.
Any other announcements? Again, I really appreciate everybody's work today. General Manager Morris, Philippe, and your staff, really appreciate all the work that went into today's meeting.
Thank you, board.
We're adjourned again.
Thank you.